He will have to live with this. He deserves nothing less than to experience the pain, suffering, and isolation that he inflicted on Corey. I hope that every moment he spends in prison is haunted by the torment of knowing he killed my child. I fear when Christopher Gregor gets out of jail, whenever that is, he will come after my family and I again. I fear for our lives. His twisted mind truly thinks that I caused all this and that he's in jail because of me, even though he's here because he killed him. I truly believe if he ever gets out and gets the opportunity, he will kill me. Your Honor, Corey should be going into 5th grade in September, hanging out with his friends, playing sports and enjoying his life. Instead, he will never experience finding his first girlfriend, graduating high school, falling in love, driving a car, getting married, or having kids. Christopher robbed him of his entire future, and Corey could have easily lived until he was 80 years old. He stole over 70 years from Corey and thousands of memories he could have made. I will never see my son again. I miss him and I love him so much. There are countless reasons Christopher deserves the maximum sentence. He rejected what I considered a generous plea deal, which shows how selfish and ignorant he is as a person. I beg you to not allow this injustice to continue, and he must face the full consequences of his actions. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Your Honor.
Thank you for your comments, ma'am. Ms. Lenta.
Your Honor, the state would move for imposition of sentence. I don't know if counsel has anything else.
You previously asked for permission to play some video.
Yes.
You wish to do that? Mr. Gallucci, do you have something else?
Yeah, Your Honor, Mr. Gregor, if you would allow it, at this point, would like to address the court.
What's the state's position?
Your Honor, we would defer to the court.
So I offered you that opportunity earlier, and I don't want this to become, I was about to ask Ms. Micciolo to address her comments to me, but I don't want this to become an attack by one family on the other. I'd be happy to hear comments directed towards character issues or the sentence to be imposed, not to refute topics that are outside the scope of this trial. So with that proviso, I'll be happy to hear from, you're talking about David Gregor, correct?
I am.
Yes.
I haven't spoken to him, so his son would like him not to speak.
So I'm not going to take a position one way or the other. Mr. Gregor, I recognize you obviously from testifying at the trial. If you'd like to speak. I have your letter. I read your letter and your wife's letter.
To be honest with you, having just learned I had the opportunity to speak 5 minutes before we began, I actually would like to read the sentencing letter as it's all factual information and is related to the last year and a half of Corey's life.
So it's questionable whether or not you actually have the right to speak. What I indicated to Mr. Gallucci is my practice typically is to exercise some discretion to allow an immediate family member of a defendant to speak. But I've read every single letter submitted on behalf of the defense, and so and your letter is 8 pages, single-spaced. So I'll be happy to hear some comments from you or some summary of that, but I mean, I can read, sir, and there's no point in you reading all 8 pages again for the benefit of whoever. I have it, I've read it thoroughly, so, but again, I'd be happy to hear from you by way of whatever you'd like to add or summarize.
Your Honor, if you don't mind me summarizing on the fly, I think there's factual information that refutes some of what I just heard.
Your Honor, the state's going to object to that. I mean, we're here for sentencing. The defendant has been convicted by a jury of his peers. Him making, at this point in time in the sentencing, factual discrepancy arguments is not appropriate, and we would object to his comments at this point.
So first let me say that despite all of the information that's been submitted by both sides, I'm not allowed to sentence someone for things that haven't been proven. So while I appreciate people have made various comments about conduct outside the scope of these crimes, I'm just simply, and I was going to place detailed reasons on the record why I'm not permitted to consider certain things. So You may not need to refute the things you need to refute, but I'm going to exercise my discretion and allow you to provide some type of verbal statement to the court that you believe is relevant to the sentencing, with the understanding the state can object in the middle of that if it becomes improper.
Thank you, Judge.
I just ask you to perhaps move up a little bit so we can make sure we pick you up on the court's recording system. That's perfect, sir. Yes, sir. Please go ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
Sir, I said in the court for when we were allowed, my wife and I, for every day I could be at the hearing. There was a lot of information in terms of Corey's upbringing while he was at the Gregor house in Monroe Township. And quite frankly, there were some references today to it that alluded to the fact that he was abused during that time period. That the first visit, which I was a part of, he left with a bloody lip, and he did, from getting a soccer ball in the mouth when he bent down to pick up the ball. I think, in all fairness to Chris, despite the fact that we looked at a 12-day time period in terms of determining his guilt, that you look at the holistic life with Corey from the day he entered the Gregor household on the first visits to the point where they left and they went to Barnacle. I think it's unfair to say that during that time period he was unhappy, he was afraid to go to the Gregor house at first when he was doing the visitations. He liked nothing better than to come to our house. He was treated like a king. Many times he was supervised with myself and my wife. His turnaround in school was absolutely incredible. He came to us classified as emotionally disturbed. And part of the reason that we agreed as a family to assist Chris in bringing him to our home was the background that not only Chris had with schooling and dealing with children who had those kinds of disabilities, was because of my involvement with my children and bringing them up through the education system. I listened and I heard about socioeconomic as to why he was doing so well with us in terms of his development, and I think that's just totally unfair. Corey thrived when he was in Monroe in every aspect. His speech improved, his ability to go from classes where he needed constant help to thriving in a general education class, to the markedly increase of his grades, to his social ability. He joined all types of sports. Chris was actively involved in everything from soccer, basketball, baseball, whatever he could play, Chris fostered. Chris volunteered to coach. To say that he was unhappy and he was abused, it didn't go on for the 8 months he was at our house. And I can say that on behalf of my wife, my other son, and my daughter, who interacted with him daily. When I hear stories about how he was afraid to come to the house and talk about certain things that Chris did, there are many things he shared with me that I'm sure you don't want to hear in terms of his treatment beyond our house. It's in my letter, and I know you've read it. I also know that you have access to DCP&P reports. There's a lot of factual information that didn't come out in the trial, and it's a shame. I know you considered, the jury considered only the evidence that was presented. The problem is all this information went out through the media, and only one side went out. You've noticed since day one that my family and I sat back and said nothing. There's much we could say to counter what was being presented here and what was being presented in terms of attacking us on social media. There's so much more to say. I trust that you've read the 8-page letter. I had only hoped that the information in there, and it's all factual information, it's all backed up by going to a police report, a DCP&P report, statements on the telephone. Everything that I said, there's a piece to back it up. It's evidence. It's not my opinion. It actually happened. The problem is those 8 pages are not read to anyone else. It's going to be up to me and my family subsequent to this to get that information out, because what was presented here is so one-sided. I don't know, and I don't use the word fair or equitable, but in terms of Corey's upbringing and how well he was doing, it wasn't talked about and it wasn't presented, and I think that's a shame.
Thank you for your comments, sir. All right, anything more from the state?
Your Honor, we do have some pictures we would like to show the court regarding Corey. Thank you.
right, what we're seeing now is a slideshow that the prosecution is playing of the victim, Corey Micciolo. Now, we heard from his grandfather, his grandmother, his mother, and then we heard a little bit from the defendant's father. Now, I think what the defendant's father wanted to talk about was guilt and innocence, and that part of the trial is done, right? There was evidence presented to the jury. The jury rendered a guilty verdict on the charge of manslaughter. So most of what the father of the defendant had to say wasn't really appropriate for this sentencing proceeding. And he apparently had submitted an 8-page, single-spaced letter with more of the same. So we saw that. So here are some pictures of the victim, sweet little boy who was killed. And, you know, these victim impact statements, as I said before, they were really directed to the judge for the most part. At the very end, we saw Brianna Micciolo directly address the defendant a few times. Okay, I think that slideshow's wrapping up. Let's hear what's going on. Oh, nope, it's still going. We're just cutting to a wider shot. We heard Brianna Micciolo directly address a few times the defendant, but for the most part, she and her parents addressed the judge, talked about what had been done to their family, how their family will never be the same, how the boy lost so much of his life ahead of him, and really urged the judge to impose the maximum sentence. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back and see more of this sentencing hearing. Don't go away.